Yeah, please come in and take your seats, everybody. My name is Anders Åslund, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council, and I spend a substantial part of my time on the Ukrainian economy. And these are, of course, quite intense days concerning Ukraine and Russia, thinking of drama around the Strait of Kerch in the last few days, and it's not directly on the topic, but of course you're welcome to bring it up. We are discussing the state of Ukraine's energy sector today. The first session will be about the energy sector more internally looking, and the second will deal with foreign policy aspects of the Ukrainian energy sector. And I should just summarize in a few words what has happened to the energy sector in Ukraine in the last 20 years. It has been an enormous change. First of all, much less energy is being used. Secondly, the composition of the energy consumption has changed radically. Much less gas, much less coal, also less oil, while a larger share of nuclear energy and renewables are going quite well. A big structure change is an attempt at marketization that we will discuss here today. But first, in order to give us an overview, we'll have Mr. Volodymyr Omelchenko speaking here, who's the director of the energy programs at the Razumkov Centre. He has previously worked in senior positions in Naftagaz and also in the National Security and Defense Council in Ukraine, and he will do a PowerPoint presentation. So, Mr. Omelchenko, the floor is yours.
Шановні учасники конференції, насамперед я хотів би подякувати організаторам цієї дискусії, і для мене велика честь приймати участь в обговоренні важливих тем енергетичної політики України тут у Вашингтоні. Ви знаєте, що останній час Україна перебуває в фокусі уваги американської політики, оскільки і насамперед вперше через агресію Росії проти України. І тому я хотів би в своїй доповіді розповісти про ті процеси трансформаційні, які відбуваються в енергетичному комплексі України. Ви знаєте, що в 2017 році в Україні була прийнята нова енергетична стратегія України до 2035 року. І Центр Разумкова, він був головним експертним розробником цього документу. Насамперед, я б хотів сказати, що ця енергетична стратегія, вона відображає основні
reflects
глобальні енергетики.
I'm sorry, I can hear myself. I would like to give...
Також я хотів би підкреслити, що Україна одна із перших приєдналася до Паризької угоди зі зміни клімату. І на сьогодні вона розробила стратегію низьковуглецевої економіки до 2050 року. Які основні пріоритети української енергетики? Це, в першу чергу,
They do not hear me. I don't know what you did. What's going on?
Особливо це стосується поставок газу. Вже 3 роки російський газ, по суті, не постачається. 3 роки.
One moment. It's not working right now. It was working earlier.
Can we...
I can give you a moment.
Okay. The problem is that I hear my own voice in my headphones.
Here. You can go and you can do consecutive right after.
You know that Russian gas to Ukraine because
І один із пріоритетів також буде збільшення власного видобутку природного газу та вугілля, значить, для задоволення внутрішнього попиту, створення стратегічних резервів нафти.
Of the strategic reserves of oil and development of energy infrastructure, the big importance Ukraine provides to decarbonization of Ukrainian energy sector. In other words, we intend to reduce energy intensivity by 2.5 times and increase the percentage of RE's share from 4% in 2015 to 25 in 2035, decreasing the coal share by roughly 2.5 times. You know that today Ukraine is implementing the EU in legislation and integrating Ukrainian markets of gas and oil into according to the EU rules. In general, it would be appropriate to characterize the reform, if we would need to characterize the reforms in Ukraine, I would say unfortunately they are not going to as fast as we would like to, but they look much better on paper than in reality. And there are so-called paper tigers who do not influence anything, and nothing has been done, though we still have certain results. One of the priorities of Ukraine is integration in the ENTSO-E, which is the integration of the synchronous operation of Ukraine and Moldova electrical grids. So when all the parties, Ukraine and EU, will cooperate properly, by 2023 we are going to start synchronization.
Що дозволить передавати потужність при повній синхронізації 4 ГВт. Ви знаєте, що на сьогодні також існує дуже серйозна проблема – це відсутність стимулюючого тарифу для енергорозподільчих компаній. Оскільки мережі України, енергетичні мережі, вони застарілі, в середній їх термін експлуатації становить близько 40 років, а рівень зносу 70%. І поточна система витрати плюс, вона не стимулює до інвестицій. Ви знаєте, що якщо електричні мережі будуть знаходитись в поганому, незадовільному стані, це приведе до того, що з'являться, і вже вони існують, серйозні ризики для інвестицій у відновлені джерела енергії, а також у видобуток газу. От один із прикладів, яку роль велику має надійність енергозабезпечення України через розподільні компанії, я б хотів привести, що от була компанія АЕС американська, вона володіла Київобленерго та Рівнеобленерго, але за відсутності зрозумілої системи тарифного стимулювання вона вимушена була піти з ринку і продати свої активи російській компанії ВСА, яка акціонери якої дуже близькі до кремлівських кіл. Україна планує запропонувати так зване РАБ-регулювання, Regulatory Asset Base, тобто коли тарифи будуть встановлюватися в залежності від оновлення основних фондів. Таким чином це буде стимулювати інвесторів вкладувати кошти. Це дуже важливо також для приватизації об'єктів. От компанія, наприклад, Центренерго, вона зараз виставляється на продаж, і тут важливо сказати, що вона буде привабливою, на мій погляд, для інвесторів тільки після того, як буде запроваджений ринок електричної енергії і встановлені стимулюючі тарифи, які би сприяли інвестиціям в електричні мережі. Надзвичайно важливою подією очікується в Україні в наступному році – це імплементація закону про ринок електричної енергії. Фактично він в 2019 році має бути запущений в дію.
Це фактично, на мій погляд, буде така поворотна точка в розвитку енергетичного комплексу України. Оскільки Україна зможе фактично через запуск нової моделі ринку електричної енергії створити більш привабливі
create more attractive investing conditions and join ENSO-E, which is the system of European operator, and secure the interests of the consumers' right and establish the proper market price policy. Today, you know that today the electric power price is developed on the basis of the international parity, and you probably heard about the so-called Rotterdam Plus approach, which was planned only for transitory period before the new model of electric energy power is going to work, and then there would be no need to attach ourselves to one of the European hubs according to the value of the carbon, and this is extremely important because many you know that Rotterdam Plus so-called model of the import parity is quite corruption prone, and it is better now than before when it was when the prices were determined by the administrative manner. In order to secure the energy strategy, Ukraine reads the investments about $200 billion but before 2020. And the most potential markets for investment, to my point of view, is energy saving, renewable energy, production of gas, and modernization of the electrical grids, and creation of Central European hub on the basis of Ukrainian subterranean storage facilities. And from that point of view, Ukraine could give to European security in area of energy. I would say that first of all, Ukraine is capable to create additional potential for synchronization and unification of electric system of the electric power system of the EU countries. For example, several years ago, Poland was facing a serious shortage of power, and thanks to Ukraine, it managed to overcome this issue. Ukraine could also be a part of the energy union and to help the joint Euro energy policy, and also it still has a chance to remain a major transitory country for gas in the future. Ukraine is also needs to buy liquefied gas from the United States, but in order to do this, we need to build Ukrainian-Polish interconnector in order to join the LNG terminal, which is about to be built in Baltic in Poland. You also know that Ukraine today is in state of war and is facing serious economic challenges. There is a great deal of budget deficit, and there is also foreign debts. Situation is also serious. And in several years, Ukraine is supposed to pay for about $40 billion to repay the debts. Therefore, a lot depends from the financial assistance to the development of the Ukrainian economy, because the reserves of the gold and foreign currency are on a very low level. So without this assistance, we should expect a default. I also would like to say about problem which is influence of Russia in Central Europe. You know that this influence is increasing step by step, and we have evidences that every year the delivery of Russian natural gas to the European countries is increasing. And I would say that for the last 2 years, Poland has increased twice the amount of Russian purchases of Russian carbon. And you also know that today Moscow is conducting a policy along with Vienna and Berlin of unification of hubs in Central Europe, as well as creation of new capacities. It plans to build nuclear reactors in Hungary, and right now they are building in Belarus. The united German gas hub, gas pool, and NCG to the benefit of Russian gas traders in the countries of EU. I would like to express my own point of view that by today, unfortunately, the assistance of both of EU and the United States, though it takes place, it is quite serious, but it is still not sufficient. And therefore, I'm convinced that if this assistance is not going to increase, not only financially, but Ukraine also is not going to be included more integrated into European and Euro-Atlantic integration, this region, I'm talking about Ukraine and the other Central European countries, they might end up under serious influence in the next 10 years of the influence of Russian Federations. Besides, I believe that it's worth to consider a scenario when the Central European countries are going to end up under political, economical influence of China. After 2025, Russia is going to be debilitated and become a Chinese satellite. And I believe that the conflict which is right now is taking place, Russia-Ukrainian conflict, first of all, it plays in favor, benefits China. And you know that so-called Silk Road, which today is implemented by China, it implies that eventually China would be able to invest more in the Central European countries. And even today, I can say that China proposes to Ukraine much more and more interesting proposals, investment proposals, than European countries or the United States and the United States. And this refers to the nuclear energy, this refers to renewable energy sources. Therefore, we should have no illusions that Ukraine by itself would be able to withstand in its war against Russia and can itself alone withstand the Chinese influence. At the same time, Ukraine is capable, if it is going to be included into the Euro-Atlantic structures and there is going to be a serious volume of investments, Ukraine could become the forepost of the Euro-Atlantic values in Europe. In other case, there is a great deal of risk that in this region Russia and China are going to dominate. I also would like to say in the end that a couple of words about the so-called Nord Stream 2. You all are aware about this issue, and from my point of view, this project has quite a great potential to be implemented. Unfortunately, although it has no serious economic foundations, most likely this is a political project. And it is based on the basis of deviating Ukraine and create a serious energy problems. The same is true about Turkish stream. And the Turkish stream could be one of the steps of the Russian domination in the Black Sea Azov region. However, at the same time, I would like to say that Ukraine has serious potential today to that the Nord Stream 2 would be limited. What I meant to say is the following. Without Ukrainian gas transportation system, Nord Stream will not be able to exist. Why? Because the Nord Stream 2 has no subterranean storage facilities on its way. It has no the experience of these zones of circulation, and if the Ukrainian system is going to be stopped as a transitory system, all the contracts of Gazprom with European competitors are going to fail. But what the European partners offer to us today, and Russia as well, that Ukraine would transport only 30 billion cubic meters is not sufficient for us, because this is less than the level of the doesn't pay off. So what I would like to offer, to suggest that Ukraine could sell its transportation capacities before 2040 for 1 billion of cubic meters per year. And this way we could save the balance in our gas transportation system and protect European consumers from the risks of the glitches in the delivery of natural gas. Therefore, we need to move the centers from the eastern borders to the western borders and separate the gas transportation operator from the mother company. Thank you for your attention.
Please, members of the panel, come and take your seats. Please. So, as you know, this is a cooperation between the Atlantic Council, the Razumkov Centre, which is the leading think tank in Ukraine, and I should particularly emphasize that the Razumkov Centre has made a big study on the energy sector in Ukraine until 2035, and this is very much the basis of government energy policy in Ukraine. What we heard now from Mr. Omelchenko was both the domestic development and the external development. As I mentioned, all of these things about Nord Stream 2, Europe, Russia, Turkish Stream, that goes for the second session. And I'm looking particularly at Ambassador Morningstar here at the front row when it comes to Nord Stream 2. But this first session should deal with the key policy issues in the internal sector. And you can say that oil and coal are not at the top. At the top are electricity and gas. And this panel you can formulate in 3 questions. The first question is what happens to renewables, and that is for Svetlana Chikhanova to develop. I can tell you that a lot is happening. The second question is what is happening with marketization of gas and electricity. We are supposed to, laws have been adopted on gas and electricity markets, and they are supposed to be implemented from the 1st of July next year. Will that really happen? And the gas sector is now quite dynamic. Production is finally increasing, that we waited for a long time. And one of the participants in that is Burisma, that is also a partner in this undertaking. And Burisma is it the 3rd largest independent, or is it the 2nd largest? The first. independent, but there are 4 significant independent gas producers beside the dominant state sector that accounts still for 3/4 of the production. And then we have my old friend Ed Chow from CSIS and Georgetown University, who's the person who always knows how to summarize what is important in any energy question in a few sentences in a very spirited fashion. So with this brief introduction, I start with asking Svetlana Chekhanova to tell us what is going on with renewables in Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Yeah. Oh.
Ukraine's renewable energy market becomes even more important, especially with the steep increase in the gas prices and the adoption of the green tariff price incentives for electricity from the renewable energy sources. To stimulate the operation and development of the renewable energy sources in Ukraine, a green tariff or special feed-in tariff was introduced in 2009. The feed-in tariff for green projects in Ukraine is one of the highest in Europe. Other preferences include profit tax exemption for the core activities of the companies generating electricity only from renewable sources, decrease of land tax, import duty exemption for certain types of renewable energy equipment. Ukraine's short-term energy strategy targets 8% of renewables in the final energy consumption until 2020, the potential of renewables being much higher. If current policies which are described in the energy strategy of Ukraine till 2035 are maintained, the share of renewables in the electricity generation will increase from 5% in 2015 to 13% by 2030. The total could be boosted to 25% by 2035. Ukraine has made an important progress in developing renewable energy policy. The green capacity grew from 0.13 to 1.6 gigawatts over the last 9 years. It is widely expected that the introduction of the green tariff will boost activity in the renewables sector. However, there are 2 major factors determining the development of the renewables that have to be properly addressed. First is the green tariff, and it is also the lack of maneuvering capacities. Once the share of renewables in the total electricity consumption reaches 7%, the situation may arise when the households and enterprises would not be able to withstand the high prices and will have to reduce their demand. If this scenario is implemented, it would be extremely difficult to attract investments into the renewables sector. At the same time, the lack of maneuvering capacities may result in increasing the coal generation in the energy balance due to the forced reduction of the nuclear energy share, which is produced at the nuclear power plants in the basic mode. So what would be the solution? Creating the additional maneuvering capacities and development of the energy storage facilities. According to the national electricity transmission operator, Ukrenergo, in 2025, it would be required to create 2.5 gigawatts of additional highly maneuverable capacities. It can be done by way of completing the construction of the hydropower facilities and setting up the energy storage facilities. The development of the renewable energy sector has to go in line with the current state of the economy of Ukraine, which is facing serious challenges, such as dependence in the energy imports, the low level of solvency of the population, and also the need to upgrade the aging energy capital stock. The solution would be also open tariffs auctioning for the new projects after 2020. The draft law of Ukraine proposing amendments to particular laws intended to ensure competitive conditions for the renewable sector is planned to be introduced by the 1st of July 2019. The bill calls for mandatory auctions for the solar projects of over 10 megawatt and wind project of 20 megawatt. The minimum tariffs for the auctions are to be approved by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, while the ceiling tariffs will not be higher than the existing green tariff. Winners of the auctions will be awarded 20-year power purchase agreements with a guaranteed buyer, and we have to be required to complete their projects over the 3 years. Meanwhile, the tariff system will remain unchanged for already constructed and operational wind and solar parks, as well as for investors who sign power purchase agreement before the 1st of July 2019. From 2020 onwards, the green tariff rate for solar is planned to drop by 30% according to the bill. So, as a conclusion, Ukraine has a significant renewable energy potential, the deployment of which can seriously contribute to reducing the dependency on imported natural gas, decarbonization of the energy sector, and diversifying of the energy supply which is also more secure. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And if I just try to get the main points here. So currently it's 5% of all electricity that comes from renewables, and it will increase to 13%.
By 2030?
Yeah.
And it will be boosted by 25% before 2035. This is the targets of the energy strategy of Ukraine till 2035.
And what you say here also is that if you really want to get the full green tariff, you need to invest before the 1st of July next year. And that's why we are seeing now a large number of big wind power projects being invested in particular in the Kherson Oblast in southern Ukraine.
That's right. There's a lot of solar and wind projects are being developed right now in Ukraine. And you said about the Kherson Oblast, it's also Nikolaev and Odessa and other regions. And yes, it's very, it's being developed intensively right now.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And then I would like to turn to Dr. Viktor Logatsky. As I mentioned, your area is the marketization. And the big question is, will Ukraine really move from these, what should I say, imported parity prices that Dr. Omelchenko talked about, known for electricity as a Rotterdam plus, which is not necessarily a positive word in Ukraine? And will you get real markets and real market prices from the 1st of July for both electricity and gas? What do you think?
Thank you very much, Anders. I should start that our reform is have a very success result, and we reached almost reached of unbundling in Naftogaz, and we created in our state-owned large enterprises on the sector supervisory board or board of directors, which presented a representative of the government and independent directors also. But in these positive steps, we also take our hand of the heartbeating of reform in our energy sector, and should state that not everything was done that can be done. For example, we have watching about the several steps of in opposite direction. For example, in our supervisory board of Ukrenergo, the decision of Ministry of Energy and Coal Industry want to take part of operation management on this company. So it's an outrage case that will be stopped. Now we have this case in our Ukrainian courts. And a lot of what was already said about the need of investment in upgrades of our infrastructure. I should say that about $200 billion Ukraine requires to attract as investment to our energy sector within nearest 10 years. But we should first of all create a comprehensive market in our country. In gas sector, we have only one set of volume of gas for free pricing. Other two sets of gas volume constricted by public service obligation. And I think in nearest 1 or 2 years, this mechanism, PSO, so-called PSO mechanism, should be removed from this practice. And gas market should be more open. And I have a very good vision for our electricity market. We should introduce from the middle of next year a new model of energy market, which prescribe unbundling in supplying of electricity. So-called the providers of electricity should be separated from the distributed services from the distribution services company. We going that new model will allow to us to open energy market, electricity market. It's very important question. I see to attract investment, its main condition is creation of open markets. On this stage, Ukraine should call investment, and our energy enterprise should be very interesting for investment. I should say within our existing framework, our energy enterprise is underestimated, undervalued. Why? Because we should not only estimate the energy asset itself, but we should estimate also all the risks, because even valuable, very valuable things can cost, can be estimated with lowered cost. Why exists the risk, high risk, and when the property rights of the asset are very strictly limited or threatened. It's so Ukraine should fulfill its homework to ensure compatibility of energy market, internal energy market and external energy market, in order to internal energy market became an integral part of world energy market. it's our task, and we should do our that.
Excuse me here, I'm not quite sure what has been accomplished. You have today Energarinnek, a state company that buys all electricity that is generated and then passes this on to the wholesale market. Will Energarinnek disappear? Or what? How will the market be organized? Is it decided, or is it, you here primarily discuss ideas what should be done?
Idea is to organize the market, open market, and Energarinnek will be cut, and will provide mechanism with intraday market, day-ahead market, intraday market, and balancing market. Also will be ensure a possibility to buy electricity from renewables. Will be created several mechanisms which will used for guarantee buyers, which will buy all electricity from renewables to ensure interest of investment in renewables. So I agree with my colleague Svetlana that she stressed that renewables is very attractive for investment in Ukraine. Also, the natural gas production, internal gas production, is also very attractive. And my colleague Vadim will continue about it, because he is a representative of our business in this sector.
Indeed, the floor is yours now, Vadim Požarsky, and you are heading Burisma, one of the biggest independent gas producers. What can you accomplish, and what problems do you have to accomplish this? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you, Victor, for passing the floor to me. Indeed, here I represent the business side of our community, and not only our company, Burisma, as a leading private gas production company, but also the industry. Because a few years ago, we formed an association of gas producers, which include today like more than 95% of all gas producers, state and private. So let me speak also on behalf of the whole gas production industry here. First, I would like to communicate again the positive signal which our country indeed requires these days, that gas industry is one of those industries which is growing and which has got huge potential to grow. Ukraine still imports a big part of gas from abroad. Thanks to successful state policies, for the last few years, we are already not buying gas directly from Russia and Russian companies, although Ukraine still imports gas from European traders. And that also brings certain dependency. From point of view of, again, from market player, today we are at that stage where we can say that the dialogue between private enterprises, between market and the state, is on a very high and effective level. We got to give credit to current cabinet of ministers and parliament, and especially our, we call it our committee, energy committee, because during the last few years we managed to accomplish a few very important milestones. Very important laws were enacted. This, first of all, is the regulation law, which facilitates the everyday operations of gas and oil companies. Then this is the centralization law, which basically allows us to pay certain amounts of royalties to the local budgets directly. And then, of course, introduction of tax incentives in terms of decreasing royalties for newly drilled drilling wells, which altogether creates a very positive business climate. And although there are general negative trends, obviously Russian aggression obviously difficult economic state. But my signal today would be, on behalf of the industry, that there are sectors in our economy which have got potential to grow, which has got very lucrative financial incentives, and we would be really happy and proud for our industry and for our company if foreign investors, foreign oil and gas company would come, because there is still place for many. The demand is huge, and with new companies, with new expertise, with new technologies that they could bring, everybody will benefit, including us and including any other market player, state or private. So that's kind of my key message to the business and decision-making communities here, that despite all the odds, despite some negative information that we are receiving from our dear country, we should not only be the locals who invest and who contribute to the growth of the market, but we're really hopeful to see some foreign companies coming.
But let me ask you then immediately on that, are the preconditions really there? Last of this year, 40 licenses were now put out for tendering, but when I talked to the big US energy companies, they said these licenses are too small for us. This can not be of interest to big energy companies, that it could only be interesting for offshore in the area that is safely Ukrainian, around Odessa. Do you expect any foreign companies to come in and bid on these new licenses that are now on the market? And if not, why not medium-sized gas companies from abroad?
Well, I can tell you bluntly that I've been in conversation with several, put it this way, middle oil and gas companies. And actually they're coming from states, from Texas region, and they're quite interested. As you rightly pointed out, for middle-sized companies, there are a lot of interesting opportunities, and there are some interesting licenses and places that you just mentioned for them to come over, and they do show interest. They come regularly, and especially, I remember a few last rounds when Ukrainian American Business Council helped a few of those companies to organize meetings and their forums with Ukrainian players. During last month, I believe, there was a big US trade mission organized by US Embassy and Department of Commerce. And again, there were representatives of that industry there. So interest is there. In terms of middle-sized company, I haven't spoken recently with the big ones, regarding their interests. But I think as long as we start this process, as long as first newcomers appear, the other companies will look again, because we remember that they've been to Ukraine, they know the market, and as soon as we change this narrative, we change this trend, I'm sure they will join.
Good, because it has been very striking how the production has been flat for a long period, and now we do see that the gas production is increasing.
Yes, you're absolutely right. For many decades, gas production was on a flat level, and especially due to the fact that still around 80% of gas is being produced by state-owned companies. Private companies do show the very good and positive dynamics during the last 10 years. And now we account for a little more than 20%. Luckily, last year, state company, after all the reforms and introduction, new management, they started to perform certain positive trend in terms of production, and we wish them best in that. Again, and if new companies are coming, then I'm sure we could enlarge that portion of private gas production, that again going only to Ukrainian market and to Ukrainian industry.
Good.
I should add it only that Razumkov Centre was done a lot to improve investment climate to gas production sector, because we take in our hand on the hard beating of that reforms, and we have developed proposal for for distribution of rent payments between locals and the central budget. Also, we provide and grounding the rental rate to decreasing about 2 or 3 times than existing before.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I know that you need to go early, so please feel free when you have to move it. Yeah.
With your permission, I'll do that right now because
yeah.
I've got urgent flight to catch. And just before I leave, also please let me give positive credits to the work that you've done. I had time to go through and read many pages of the work that you've done, and those. I'm not an expert in electricity, but what in relation to gas, I wouldn't write better, because when you analyzed what were the problems a few years ago with rents, with that legislation we had at that time, and what are the positives today, it was rightly pointed out, and it's very good that we've got this positive synergy between expert NGO and business, and it's very important that we've got the same position on those issues. And it's a very rare case when business saying that the government, the big regulator, are on our side. So it's a very positive trend. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Ed Shaw, you always come and say something unexpected. What do you think now?
Hold on. Well, Anders, you and I have been on so many of these panels over too many years that you always challenge me to come up with something you haven't heard me say before.
And you always satisfy me.
First of all, I want to congratulate Volodymyr and his colleagues at Razumkov Centre for having put out a very comprehensive and rich report and content. I recommend that anyone who has time to download it from the website or probably at the Atlantic Council website after today, and there are copies available outside. It's well worth a read, as I have done. We've seen studies before. We've seen energy strategies before. Some of us even participated in writing some of those. Matt Sagers here in the audience did a gas study a few years ago. Maybe when Yuri Boyko returns to government, he will finally implement the study he commissioned and then ignored. So the question is, what's missing? I mean, even the people who acknowledge that important steps have been made also say that more progress should have been made, and that it seems quite obvious that the reform process has stalled, and in some ways going backwards. And there are natural reasons for that. Fatigue, people leave, political season, there are all kinds of excuses. So one thing that's missing is clearly political will on the part of the government leaders. But I want to go take the question beyond that, which is it possible to reform an energy economy like Ukraine's without very, very fundamental structural reform of the way the system operates? Is it enough to put good people, professional people in the right jobs and change some conditions on the margins without changing the system altogether? If you have a system that's conducive to corruption, is it not just a matter of time before that returns? No, are much more fundamental structural changes need to be done. I mean, I take the example of increasing production upstream. Can you do that in a massive way without changing the licensing process altogether, without changing the way the Ecology and Natural Resources Ministry functions, with the way the State Geological Service functions, without putting in real rules in terms of relinquishment of licenses that are not being currently worked on, the so-called sleeping licenses in Ukrainian terms. Is it possible to have a competitive, efficient marketplace for gas production if 75% of market share is controlled by a state-owned company? I wouldn't want ExxonMobil or any other company to have 75% of the US gas extraction market. Does it work, or do you have to actually break up some of these systems that have been a legacy from the Soviet Union for a very long time? Is it time to think about that? You know, the so-called Independent Energy Regulatory Commission, where, you know, the people in Kyiv understands who controls them, which oligarch has the ear of which commissioner. I mean, all these are very transparent, I must say, to a visitor, which is quite interesting. One of the other challenges to Ukraine reform in general, it seems to me, is the lack of membership perspective to the EU and NATO. So that there wasn't the goal that other Central and Eastern European countries had as a driver for their reform. So that's nothing that Ukraine itself can do anything about, except in one way, it seems to me, on energy, is how can Ukraine convert itself from what is seen today as a liability to European energy security into an asset for European energy security. And then Europe should be so lucky as to have Ukraine as a member. So how do you make yourself attractive so that the European Union would want Ukraine as a member? And I guess gas production would be one area, increasing gas production. You know, Ukraine used to export gas to the Russian Republic. Ukrainian geologists tell me that Ukraine can be back up to producing 70, 80 BCM a year. I'm an economist by training. I'm not a geologist, so I always discount what geologists tell me by half. So even if it's 30, 35 BCM a year, Ukraine would become a net gas exporter.
Yes, it will be enough for internal,
right?
At least.
Now, if you're a net gas exporter, what happens is that import parity means something very different. It means Baumgarten minus rather than Baumgarten plus in terms of domestic pricing. So clearly that's one area where Ukraine can be an asset. The other area is transit, which Volodymyr mentioned. In spite of Turkish Stream, in spite of Nord Stream 2, if it proceeds, Ukraine's land pipeline structure, as well as gas storage facility, has a real value to European energy security. Ideally, that the system will operate in such a fashion that Gazprom no longer becomes the only shipper. There are gas buyers who can also be shippers in that system. But in order to do that, you have to unbundle it from Naftahas. Yeah. And not just on paper, as they have already done on paper, but also bring in a European gas pipeline operator to co-manage the pipeline system, which is something that's been on the government's agenda for a couple years, but everyone in Ukraine understands that there's been a domestic struggle over control of Ukretransgas. So if you don't do that, then it will continue to be seen as a liability rather than an asset, when the potential is there to be an asset. The other area, last area I would mention, is the renewable and energy efficiency area. I mean, clearly, Ukraine is a very energy-intensive economy currently relative to its GDP. As a result, it's one of the larger greenhouse gas emitters relative to its GDP. If Ukraine works in energy efficiency as well as renewables, that will improve the situation very much. The other point I would bring up is, what do you do with the incumbents in the energy sector? no matter how non-transparently they may have acquired the assets. They provide a real service. Then you need to have a transition. You want those people to not become just rentiers, but investors in the business. Hundreds of billions of dollars investments just in the power sector is necessary. How do you attract that without changing the attractiveness of the investment conditions in Ukraine? And there, I think domestic capital is very important. I mean, it's easier to say we want foreign direct investment, but if your own capitalists don't invest, why would a foreigner want to invest in your country? So the big signal to foreign direct investment is to have domestic capital reinvest in the business and modernization of the energy sector, which is very much needed. The last point, if you permit me on this, I would like to make is the question of elections, which everyone knows is coming up. More than a year ago, when I was in Kiev, people were starting to talk about elections. And stupid American, I don't understand why they were talking about elections in September 2017 when there are no elections in 2018. But now we have elections upon us. And it's conventional wisdom in Kiev as well as in other capitals that no significant reform will take place in Ukraine during an election year. Well, forgive me my naivete again. Now, why is that? In a democratic society, in a democratic society striving to become a market economy, it seems that these are very important issues that should be discussed in the campaign in order to get the buy-in of the population, in order to get the buy-in of the parliament for real reform to proceed. And being dismissive of the idea that 2019 is a last year for reform in Ukraine strikes me as a big mistake. And what happened last week in the Sea of Azov, it seems to me, underscores the urgency of making Ukraine stronger by going through with reform, and that needs to be discussed. If you campaign on the basis that gas prices aren't going to increase, you're not going to govern by increasing gas prices, it strikes me. So if you want to explain to the population what are the benefits of liberalizing the energy economy, then this is the opportunity to do so rather than to shy away from it.
Thank you very much, Ed. As always, many wise words. Rather than us continuing the discussion, I would like to open this up to the floor to questions, comments, and answers. We are slightly delayed since we started. I first would like to invite Vitaly Tarasyuk, Minister Counselor from the Ukrainian Embassy, but briefly, you'll get a mic here.
Well, thank you so much, Anders, for the opportunity. I just first wanted, Ambassador Charlie wanted to be present also here today, and I will say just a few words on his behalf and on behalf of the embassy. First of all, a big thank you to the Atlantic Council for convening this important event. And I think, especially during the situation we have right now with the, increase of Russia's aggression in the Azov Sea, I think we also need not forget about the issues that transform Ukraine's economy, and energy sector is one of those sectors that has a great potential for that. I just wanted to highlight and to draw attention of the audience to bilateral component that we have with the United States, and it's been developing pretty actively in recent months. Just for you all to know that we, within the Strategic Partnership Commission on the 16th of November, we had Energy and Economy Working Group that Ambassador Morningstar used to chair before. So it's happening, the dialogue with the State Department is happening. But on top of that, we had a visit of Secretary of Energy Perry to Ukraine on 12th of November, and during this visit, a new dialogue was launched, energy security and dialogue with Department of Energy, that will also strengthen, cooperation and discussion with the United States on many different issues, on nuclear, on potential of more active involvement of U.S. companies in upstream in Ukraine, and that's what Vadim was saying today about the interest of U.S. companies to do more in Ukraine. And I can tell you, we're also as an embassy involved in talks with several companies from Texas that are interested to do more in Ukraine in exploration. So, and within those frameworks that we have with the State Department and Department of Energy, we're discussing all of those issues. What should be done, to streamline the licenses or PSAs in Ukraine, and all of the other measures that should create more attractive environment for foreign businesses coming into Ukraine, for US and European companies taking more active role in Ukraine's energy sector, and not only, as we said, in traditional for the US companies nuclear sector, where US companies are present for more than 20 years already, but also in the upstream and exploration of energy. And there is a huge potential to do more. We also brought with us a couple of presentations for the, I think, next panel prepared by Naftogaz on Nord Stream 2, kind of like diffusing the myth about the Nord Stream 2. It's outside, so if anybody's interested, please have a look. And also a few presentations prepared by National Investment Council on renewables and upstream potential in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vitaly. I would like to invite anybody who wants to have a question or a comment to the panel, and then I would like to ask the panel to respond to whatever they feel like. I don't see any hands, no questions. Please.
Just a couple of quick ones.
Wait for the mic. And introduce yourself by name and institution.
Sure. I'm Nathan from the U.S. State Department Bureau of Energy Resources. Just a couple of quick questions. One of you mentioned $200 billion in new investment in the energy sector. If you could elaborate on where that investment is needed. I think someone mentioned the electricity sector, but GTS might be another candidate. And then also, I know this panel is not about, or it hasn't really focused on coal, but obviously the loss of anthracite, rise in import prices. I'd be interested to hear how those costs are being absorbed by Ukraine.
Thank you. And I saw here. Here, please. There first.
Bob Eichord from the Atlantic Council. I mean, we've seen a lot of efforts to develop market reform activities over the years, as Ed pointed out. And Ukraine leadership committed to joining the energy community and implementing the third package in electricity and gas. And I'm glad to see that the laws to do that have finally been passed. But now the key issue is, can you implement them? We've been talking about bilateral contracts in electricity markets for 15 years. So I'm hoping that the political will, as you were talking about, Ed, will move things faster than in the past. That's my comment. Nobody's mentioned heat. And heat is so important in Ukraine for both the electricity and the gas sector. And it's sort of the unfinished agenda in much of the region. So I'm interested in how is the government approaching this? Because obviously you've had the issues related to both pricing, rationalizing pricing, to the insolvency and difficulties of the municipal heating companies in serving the population, and also the potential to use renewable energy, biomass in some of these systems. And so I think that there is an urgency that at least I've seen over the years to deal more aggressively with the heat issue and to attract the investment that's needed into these areas. What can you say about this issue?
Thank you. Another question, Beth.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd like to bring up the question of the
Name and institution.
Okay, Darian Diachak. I used to work for USAID in Ukraine. I'd like to bring up the question of Eastern Ukraine, of the two breakaway republics, where coal is extremely abundant, and it's a much better quality than people generally give it credit for, because of how the political situation works. People even, geologists even say there's more coal potential, enough coal potential in Eastern Ukraine to take care of Ukraine's energy problems for perhaps 100 years. And also, there's a tremendous amount of gas in that same area as well. People even say that there's more gas than coal in Eastern Ukraine. Now, to what extent do you think that the central government of Ukraine is holding on to the possibility of regaining those territories because of their energy potential and importance for the future of the country?
Thank you. One more question. Then I'll turn to the panel.
Good afternoon. My name is Anatoly Bishko. I'm a founder of a non-governmental organization called Partnership for Corruption-Free Ukraine. My question, not surprisingly...
Partnership for Corruption.
Partnership for Corruption-Free Ukraine?
Yeah.
My question is, not surprisingly, energy sector has been known as being one of the most corrupt sectors in Ukrainian economy and the state. Are you satisfied with the progress made in the last 2-3 years to fight the corruption? And do you envision substantial progress continue to be made, I guess, at this point after the next presidential elections? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we should stop with that, and then I turn to the panel, and perhaps I start with Victor, whatever you want to answer. Also, if you want to respond to Ed, but select it. $200 billion, that was from you. I don't know if you or Svetlana wants to discuss coal and heat, and corruption is always an interesting topic. The floor is yours.
I will start. Because a lot of questions were related to establishment of energy markets in Ukraine sector. I should say that the most important way to the establishing open energy market is unbundling of the companies, and it's a main precondition of in the way of organized comprehensive energy market in Ukraine. The second is establishing modern energy institution as well as participant of the energy market, like the energy companies, like the state authority which should regulate our energy markets. It's also important we achieved in this several success, and we have new energy regulator law which was adopted by our parliament, which provide clear mechanisms to creation of these authority, and I believe that new staff of our energy regulator will ensure and help us to organize an open market. And also I should say that modern standard of corporate governance should also introduced in our companies. For the first step, it's to supply of independent supervisory board in our companies. And the second is more open for the private owned companies, because not always of them are open public joint stock company, and to attract an investment they should stay more transparent and understandable for foreign business. So if we bundle together these mechanisms, and we can create a more open, more competitive market and attract investment. But $200 billion is a modest estimation of investment that require of energy complex of Ukraine. For example, it's estimated for nearest 10 years. It's not the investment which needed in all investment in 1 year. It's a prolonged period which investors should be used in modernization of energy infrastructure. For example, we need to build more nuclear plants, nuclear capacity to substitute the capacity which will be decommissioned in nearest 10 or 7 years. It's a significant amount. Only in this direction we need about $40 billion. The next step is to provide energy efficiency. We're going to start to launch energy efficiency fund functioning from the next year. The tremendous resources to enhance our efficiency is located in our household sectors, public buildings, and transportation sector. It's also require quite a lot of investments.
Thank you very much. What would you like to react on coal or on heat?
Yeah, although coal is gradually, it becomes less significant as it being substituted by the renewables, its part would still remain essential in the Ukrainian energy industry by 2035, mainly in the thermal generation, which performs, among other things, an important capacity maneuvering function. Also, the nuclear share will still remain essential in the Ukrainian sector because in these next 20 years, the country's economy would not have a boost to develop normally without the nuclear sector. Also, the nuclear power is more favorable than the coal to achieve decarbonization, which is the major objective as it is set forth by the energy strategy of Ukraine till 2035. Yeah.
Thank you. Ed, do you have any final wise words as always?
Well, I don't know about wise words.
Words, man.
Yeah, most of the questions were about the domestic energy economy, so I think our guests have answered them. But let me tackle the corruption question, which is easier for a foreigner to talk about. It seems to me the fundamental problem with the Ukrainian energy economy, and which is why it's been the source of corruption for the last 25 years or longer maybe, is the lack of market competition and transparent regulation. The combination of the two is just too tempting. I mean, it's too easy. So the question is, how can you improve on both areas? So if the new Energy Regulatory Commission become truly independent and start operating like a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission might, you remember one of the first moves of the new FERC commission was to deny something the Trump administration wanted to do to support nuclear and coal. Well, that's hard to imagine in the Ukrainian context, a regulatory commission opposing what the government wanted to do. And the other area is to break up monopolies. as much as possible and bring in competition as much as possible. Yeah. If you're going to have a monopoly, then you better have a regulated rate of return. Otherwise, there's no justification to have a monopoly. So improving on both areas is to me, is the solution to curing the corruption, energy corruption problem altogether.
I should only add to Edward that transparent and competitive access to natural resources should be also provided by the National Geological Service. It should be very important.
Let me just say a few words in conclusion. First, on corruption. It used to be a massive subsidization, that the government paid 8% of GDP in energy subsidies. That's gone. So this is a massive anti-corruption policy that has been undertaken. The new problem, as both Ed and Victor touched upon, it's monopolization. Prices used to be too low, now they're probably slightly too high because of monopoly phenomena, and the question is, how do we combat them? And of course, marketization domestically is important, but also open up to foreign competition, so that the domestic markets are not closed as they are to a considerable extent now. But I wanted to bring out two elements that in particular you, Victor, have touched upon, but also Vadim, and that is there are now independent supervisory boards of many state companies, which brings in quite an independent and open attitude. I'm myself on the board, independent director of Ukrzaliznytsa, the Ukrainian railroads, and there are at least 5 such boards now of big state companies and 3 more, and this creates a very healthy reformist attitude, because the government then wants to show that it's also reformist. It's very much the cabinet of ministers. Together with EBRD. We have Michelle Small here from EBRD that is driving this, and then it is young CEOs. Most of the CEOs of these companies are in their 30s, who have happened to end up there in one way or the other, and this drives a lot of change. So this is one positive element. And what Vadim mentioned, it is that decentralization really functions now. The local authorities have got money and authority, so therefore they can make decisions which they could not make 2 years ago, because they had to send all decisions to Kiev. And that makes things much better. But in the end, I come back to Ed's observations here, that we are now facing elections, and does anybody discuss reform? Everybody here in the room understands that Ukraine needs more reform. And then you wonder, why aren't the government candidates and the opposition candidates discussing reforms, rather than the discussion is about populism or about national issues, when the fundamental defense is to get a well-functioning society and economy. So this is what one would really like to see happening in Ukraine. And this is really the litmus test of Ukrainian politics, if we will see the right debate develop before the presidential elections, or if it only will be about power. Thank you very much. Let us take 5 minutes technical or coffee break and convene immediately afterwards. And Melinda Herring will moderate the next session.
Okay, let's get started. I'm sorry we're running behind, and I want to use the remaining time that we have. We will end at 5 o'clock sharp, I promise you that. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the editor of the Ukraine Alert blog here at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for staying for part 2. I hope you are sufficiently caffeinated, and you're ready for a great discussion about the global context of energy. We have 2 of Ukraine's finest experts on energy here, and 2 of the leading experts in the United States. To my left is Dr. Ariel Cohen, my colleague at the Atlantic Council. 1 seat over is Ambassador Richard Morningstar, who started our global energy program. To his left, I have Maxim Bilovsky from the Razumkov Centre, and 1 seat over is Volodymyr Omelchenko, and you heard from him earlier this morning. So let's jump right in. Maxime, I'd like to start with you. What's the significance of Ukraine to the energy, to the European energy sector, and more broadly, the global energy context? Why should anyone care about Ukraine in the context of energy? Why is Ukraine significant?
Дякую за запитання. Я, з вашого дозволу, буду говорити своєю рідною мовою. Знаю, що у нас сьогодні здійснюється переклад, тому я думаю, що всі зможуть почути мою позицію. Насамперед, Україна обрала шлях євроінтеграції. Євроінтеграція не може бути здійснена без, власне, синхронізації з ринками електроенергії та природного газу. Український уряд розглядає інтеграцію української економіки в Європейський Союз, в тому числі базуючись на інтеграції енергетичних ринків. Чому це потрібно не тільки Україні? Враховуючи той потенціал інфраструктури енергетичної, мова йде про газотранспортну систему, мова йде про об'єднану енергетичну систему, є великі можливості для розвитку бізнес-проєктів. Насамперед, це повна інтеграція об'єднаної енергетичної системи з системою НСІ. Це, власне, відкриття газових воріт для трейдерів, європейських трейдерів газу в газовому сховищі України. В цьому контексті важливо також розуміти, що яке, власне, місце Сполучених Штатів Америки. Це через майбутній проєкт інтерконектор Україна-Польща, відкриття можливостей по закачуванню зберіганню природного газу в найбільшому газовому сховищі Європи, яке, власне, знаходиться в Україні в безпосередній близькості до кордону, і таке інше. Тому, якщо коротко підсумувати, власне, чому потрібно звернути увагу на місце України в енергетичних процесах європейських і світових для наших друзів і партнерів міжнародних, це чудові перспективні стартапи, це перспективні бізнес-проекти, які дадуть свій прибуток. Звісно, він не буде відразу, але, власне, для цього ми сьогодні зібралися.
Great, thank you so much, Volodymyr, and I'd like to congratulate you and Maxime on the publication of your 84-page report. I know that involves a huge amount of work, so congratulations. I know we're all looking forward to reading it in depth. Volodymyr, I'd like to turn to you. What role does energy play in the standoff between Russia and Ukraine? Is it a tool or a weapon? And is there any reason to think that energy is one of the motivating factors behind the latest conflict in the Sea of Azov?
На мій погляд, що енергетика – це один із потужніших важелів впливу, які використовує Росія з приходу Володимира Путіна на пост президента.
He can't hear you. Can you talk into the microphone?
Чутно?
Thank you.
Да. На мій погляд, Президент Росії Путін з часу свого приходу
розповсюдження впливу Росії в країнах Центральної Європи, Східної Європи, насамперед в Україну. І які заходи існують для цього?
Okay, the translation is number 2 now.
Okay, no, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about these problems.
Can you hear? People, can you hear me?
Повтори, пожалуйста.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes.
Okay.
You know that Russia today is building Nord Stream 2 and Turkish Stream, not because they have some economic interests or commercial interests. First of all, we're talking about to obviate Ukraine and to build an energy blockade of for Ukraine. Not only for Ukraine, but in general, Russia would like to by using gas prices and using new streams and corrupting of certain countries in Central Europe which are involved into building gas pipelines and to promote its own interests. Therefore, from that point of view, I would say that the energy is the main tool for Russian influence in order to reinforce its political influence in the region. You know that the main goal and main strategic goal of Russia, which we have voiced, which President Putin has voiced, is renewal of Russian influence within the former Soviet borders of the former Soviet Union. This is one goal, and the second goal is renewal of the Russian influence within the borders of the former Warsaw Pact nations. I mean Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary. This would be the next stage. This is the political strategy of Russia. Energy is the most important element of the implementing this strategy.
Interest in Nord Stream 2 in this crowd. John Herbst, our director of the Razumkov Centre, argued in a piece in the American Interest back in May that Nord Stream 2 won't be built. He said that U.S. sanctions and a weakening European consensus make it less likely to happen. Other analysts say that Nord Stream 2 is a done deal. Who's right? What factors should we be watching? What do you expect? And how hard should the U.S. push against Nord Stream 2? If Ambassador Morningstar could start, that would be great.
Well, just to start with, I don't really agree with John on that. I hope he's right. I'm not a great fan of Nord Stream 2, as I think most of you in the audience know. But I'm not as optimistic as John is. Let me say one or two things first, and then get back to Nord Stream 2. I think the first panel was extremely important, and in a lot of ways, a lot more important than Nord Stream 2. Not that Nord Stream 2 isn't important, but the key point is that Ukraine, and they've made progress, has to develop its energy economy. And Ed Chow, I think, hit the nail on the head, that Ukraine has to show that energy is a strategic asset. Its own energy is a strategic asset that is of value to Europe and to the rest of the world. Ed just walked in. I was giving you a shout out saying what you said was extremely important earlier today, and probably even more important than Nord Stream 2. Ukraine has made progress. It's made progress in raising tariffs. It's made progress in reverse flow. It's made progress in diversifying nuclear fuel. And there are a bunch of other things that were talked about today, but there's still a long way to go. And that has to be, I think, the biggest emphasis. Nord Stream 2 is important. Will it happen? I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that anybody knows. You know, there was talk in Europe, and I haven't heard much lately about a deal that Merkel was going to try and broker with Ukraine. I heard earlier today that, well, Gazprom might be willing or need to ship 30 BCM through Ukraine, which may not be enough. But whether or not some deal can be brokered, again, very uncertain. A lot of concern. If there is a deal, how do you enforce it? How do you hold Gazprom to its word? There's been some talk. I've heard talk about contingent sanctions that if transit goes down by more than a certain amount, that maybe sanctions could then go into effect. But you know, there'd have to be conditions. The transit system would have to operate. Couldn't be raising transit fees by by a large amount. But in any event, so there are all sorts of things being bandied about. There's still the question of U.S. sanctions. It's a possibility. Frankly, I think it's maybe more of a possibility today than it was a week ago. I think that Russian behavior is going to be a primary factor in determining whether U.S. sanctions ultimately takes place. And I would think that unless there is a very rapid de-escalation in the crisis that has taken place in the last week, that could have a material effect. Let me tell you how I think that would have an effect. There are many bits of legislation in Congress now which could allow for sanctions. In fact, it's already discretionary on the part of the president. There is actually some reluctance among many members of Congress, several members, I'm not sure I'd say many, but certainly several members of Congress, to enact sanctions. Anders has pointed this out in a piece that you wrote a couple of months ago, a concern that if the U.S. were to sanction Nord Stream 2 and directly go after Europe in that way, that could destroy the unity on sanctions overall with respect to Russia, and could create a problem that way. I think if things continue to deteriorate or don't improve with respect to what's come up in the last week, a lot of those concerns are going to go by the wayside. And between what might come out in the Mueller investigation, any further adverse Russian behavior, I think that could lead to more of a bipartisan support for sanctions. I don't know that that's going to be the case, but I think that the odds would increase. I think the Russians have made a terrible mistake. I don't know why they're doing what they're doing, probably trying to see what they can get away with, but I don't know how they can believe that they can deny half of the coast of Ukraine access to the Black Sea. And I think if this continues, that will resonate, and an obvious way to hit back would be Nord Stream 2. Still, I think it's very uncertain. The companies claim that they're going to need Ukrainian transit along with Nord Stream 2. Maybe that's the case. The irony is that might even increase the dependence on Russian gas. When I've spoken to companies, if any my advice, whatever it's worth, is keep your exposure as low as possible while the uncertainty continues. And I think this uncertainty is going to continue for some time.
Thank you so much. Ariel, can I ask you the same question about Nord Stream 2? And can I ask you one further question? What will it take to shame Germany on this issue?
Excellent question, Melinda. And as I was mentally preparing for the presentation, I was reaching back to a conversation I had on November 1st or 2nd in Batumi, Georgia, with a senior German war planner, Minister of Defense, military planner. And I said, and because I'm aware of the chatter in Moscow about a future war with Ukraine. And I mentioned that to you, we corresponded. In Moscow, in the pro-Kremlin circles, they are talking about the next round in Ukraine, that they punch through Mariupol or go around Mariupol, push to Kherson, push to Mykolaiv, take Odessa, and go all the way to Transnistria. Cutting off Ukraine from the Black Sea altogether, and then maybe or maybe not going to Dnipro and Kharkiv, and stopping on the left bank of the Dnipro, and leaving a rump Ukrainian state. And I laid out this scenario to the German military planner and said, mein Herr, what would the German reaction be if, God forbid, the Russians try to implement this scenario? And he said, guess what he said? Nothing. They're not in NATO. This is a true story, just fresh from the conference. The Georgian Defense Conference, whatever, the annual conference in Batum. I said, but sir, he said, they're not in NATO. We're not doing anything. I said, but sir, for sure you could stop the Nord Stream construction. And he said, why? This is business. I said, okay, let's play another scenario. I mean, in the military circles like that, you talk about different scenarios. You know, we've all done these exercises in Washington. I said, what if Putin and Lukashenko cut some kind of a deal and Belarus integrates much further into Russia, and there are many Russian military bases, you know, because we're talking about the Fort Trump in Poland, the U.S. military base in Poland, and he said, well, Germany is strongly against that. We cannot provoke the Russians. And there is an argument why that may be a valid proposition. And I said, but if they put these military bases in Belarus, for sure you can cut, you can stop the Nord Stream 2 construction. And he said, why? This is business. So the answer to your question of what it will take to shame Germany when the most pro-Western, and I don't want to say anti-Russian, yeah, well, you can say anti-Russian, politician, Angela Merkel, is on her way out and in political decline, my answer to you is, I don't know. I don't know how the post-Merkel political struggle in Germany is going to play out. There are circles in Germany, they're not the majority, but there's circles in the business community and in the policy community, both on the left and on the right, who I, for shorthand, call the Locarno circles. Locarno in 1923 was a place in Italy, Switzerland. Where was Locarno? Switzerland, where the Germans and the Soviet Russians and the Weimar Germans cut a deal for military cooperation. So these circles are still there. And as Merkel is fading, I don't know who's going to inherit her and whether that person is going to be from a CDU. Maybe the future leader of Germany is not from CDU, and there are circles, both in SPD and elsewhere, who are not necessarily a big proponents of a strong transatlantic tie, as that German military planner was, and he told me which party he was from. He was from AfD, from Alternative für Deutschland.
Oh, wow.
So that is one thing. The other thing is, a lot of what we're talking about is driven by German energy policy. It is German decision, and this is a consensus decision from the Grüne all the way to the CDU, to shut down their nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. And my question is, if the Japanese didn't shut it really down, if the Ukrainians are maintaining a pretty rickety Soviet, post-Soviet fleet of reactors, why the Germans, with their amazing technological prowess, cannot maintain their nuclear reactors a little bit longer? Why the Germans cannot import LNG? Well, the answer is, of course, because LNG is more expensive. Mrs. Merkel tried to sort of balance the Nord Stream 2 decision with the promise of a terminal in northern Germany, not far from Hamburg, that would import LNG, but the average capacity for LNG terminals in Europe is about 25%. So the chances of that particular terminal really providing some kind of a balance to Gazprom, in my book, is not necessarily very high.
Let the record reflect this is the first time I've ever heard you say, I don't know. I have to tease him. Volodymyr, I'd like to ask you the same question. We have a consensus, I think, maybe, but let's bring in Volodymyr.
Just let me strengthen the consensus. I agree with Ambassador Morningstar that we don't know if Nord Stream 2 is going to be built, but exactly. But from my point of view, it's being built. They're laying the pipe as we speak.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Volodymyr, on Nord Stream 2?
I'd like to add the following.
Я не дуже згоден, що Росія вибирає військовий шлях впливу на Росію. Це скоріше політичний через вибори. І вони очікують на сьогодні, як пройдуть вибори в Україні. Вже після цього будуть розігрувати інші сценарії боротьби.
Regarding Nord Stream 2, I already mentioned in my presentation, I would like to focus one more time. Without Ukrainian gas transportation system, Nord Stream 2 is not going to work because it's not going to be able to use the... Ukraine also cannot be a sponsor of the Nord Stream 2 actions, shareholders. It cannot transport gas without below the level of profit. So once if the contract which is going to be expired is not going to be renewed, the Nord Stream 2 is not going to cover all the needs of Europe in natural gas. So lots of contracts are going to be interrupted. So we would like Ukraine to at least minimal volumes would transport. So I would like to secure the balance of interest. So we could do the bidding for falling capacities for ship and pay, including on the Russian cordon, at least 60 billion cubic meters. And this way, Ukrainian consumers would be secured with the deliveries over the long term natural gas, and Ukraine would remain the transit country, and all the balance of interest would be secured, because today we cannot calculate, at least from my point of view, unless Ukraine is not going to be another stupid thing that that Nord Stream 2 is going to fail, and I believe that the United States are going to do some kind of sanctions. We should be preparing ourselves for this, what we just said. I also would like to briefly add, 2 days ago, national regulator in Ukraine, which is dealing with the monopolies in Ukrainian market regarding the lowering of tariff, reducing of tariff for the transportation of gas in Ukraine. And I believe that this was real action of the Ukrainian government to increase the compatibility of Ukrainian transport system and send the message to our European partners that we are willing and ready to defend our right to remain the transit power. And probably this is my most important message for today.
Great, thank you. I want to follow up on Ed Chow's challenge. He said something like, I think it's conventional wisdom that this is an election year and there'll be no major reforms. And I'd like to get your view. You all cover slightly different issues. That is the conventional wisdom that there won't be any big reforms. In the energy sector, do you see Ukraine pushing forward on any of the big reforms it's committed to? I know that the gas sector, the retail market is a problem, and it's changed some, but it's not truly competitive, and that there's a problem with bringing new players in. There's a problem with the regional markets. Do you think that's going to change before the elections? And gentlemen here, if you could comment, do you think, is there any momentum left? Do you see any big changes before the elections? Let me start with Ariel.
I wrote about the abysmal tariff situation on new investment into the gas sector in Ukraine as early as 2014, 2015. And since then, I understand that the tariffs went down somewhat. But correct me if I'm wrong, are they still the tariffs on the volume of production or the tariffs on profit? Because the international practice is that you tax profit. You don't tax overall volume of production. And if that didn't change, and if the practice in which Naftogaz is trying to position itself as a monopolist or quasi-monopolist for exploration and production, which in my book, where I come from ideologically, is wrong. There has to be a competition and a market, including in the exploration and production. With all due respect, Ukraine is no Saudi Arabia, and Naftogaz is no Saudi Aramco. So please open the doors to those Americans and others who are knocking on your doors, and including Ukrainian private companies, and try to do exploration and production themselves, provide viable market conditions for these people to sell their gas. Do not establish a monopolist like the Russians do, and you will have eventually a thriving Ukrainian gas sector. My dad was an oil geologist and prospector who discovered, with a team of people in Kharkiv, who discovered Shebelinka. There's no reason other Shebelinkas will not be discovered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxim.
Коротка репліка. Буквально, найперше, для того, аби пришвидшити реформи в Україні, які, наприклад, на газовому ринку.
For example, in the gas market taking place for the third year, we need to remove the influence of political populist and political impact on this sector, because politics and energy are two completely different areas which cannot be combined. And regarding the foreign investments into gas area, for 2018, first we made two important steps. First step was providing online auctions in order to issue licenses for the, production of the natural gas. And these auctions began to work literally in the third quarter of 2018. And the second step is the transparency in the whole area. In this, we're working for this for the second year, and of course, it's nothing is perfect. And the very trend of opening the data about the production and delivery could be better, but we still continue working on it. This is basically.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Morningstar wants to jump in, and I'd like to get our staff ready to take questions, and I'd like to ask you all to start thinking of questions. We have about 17 minutes, so please get your questions ready, Ambassador Morningstar, and then we're going to turn to you all.
Okay, just on the question of can Ukraine enact reforms prior to the election, I don't know. So it's another one that I, answer. I don't know. I don't know enough about domestic politics in Ukraine to say that, to say one way or the other. But having said that, and my guess is probably not, but having said that, that doesn't mean that programs cannot be formed. Naftogaz, we know that Naftogaz is working on on how they intend to comply with the third energy package, how they would intend to unbundle. They have to have that ready to be introduced and implemented, if not before the election, after the election. We've all spoken, everybody's spoken about the steps that need to be taken with respect to energy to make energy a strategic asset without going back into the specifics. There ought to be candidates ought to have platforms as to how they're going to accomplish that, and they ought to be encouraged to do so. So it's not a zero-sum situation. It's not a question of no reform prior to the election or reform prior to the election. It's getting the work, at the minimum, getting the work done so that the issues are clear and can hopefully be implemented, if not before the election, after the election.
Thank you. That's a nice summary. And hopefully the candidates will read your report. Now let's turn to our audience. We have a microphone, and we ask you to say your name, your affiliation, and to please ask a question. No statements, please. We have a question right here, please. Thank you.
I was actually going to make a statement.
Oh, no. We'll take that microphone away.
I'm Matt Sagers with IHS Market. And I basically wanted to say that, a lot of the discussion about Nord Stream acts like it's still under thought or consideration. It's under construction, and they're going to be done very shortly. Turk Stream just finished. And when I think about Nord Stream 2, to me, it's an economic project. But I'm an economist. And I look at it very simply. As production has shifted to Bovanenkova, it's about 1,000 kilometers shorter from field to factory. So therefore, it should be cheaper. And so I just kind of ask a very simple set of questions. If you fly from city A to city B, do you want to take a direct flight that's shorter? Do you want to take an indirect flight that takes a longer time to get there? Would you rather fly on a new plane or an old plane? Also, do you want to pay a tariff up front that you know what the ticket price is going to be? Or do you want to wait and find out afterwards, depending upon how many people are sitting on the plane? It becomes very simple. Now, I'm fully aware Ukraine thinks about it differently, very emotionally. They're fighting a war that's sort of heated up and gone down, that's cost them blood and treasure. What's very interesting is the treasure runs about $3.5 billion a year, which is about the transit fee that it generates. So there's kind of an ironic connection between there. Several years ago, Ed and I were working on a transit project for oil. And basically, as we were talking at that time, I said, guys, if you don't become more competitive, if you don't realize what's happening with these bypasses, your transit volume is going to go to zero very quickly. Ed, what's happened to Ukraine's oil transit volume? Pretty dry. And I think, thank you.
Let's give them a
So that's
chance
what
to
I was
respond.
just saying is that basically.
Thank you. We got it. Ambassador Morningstar.
Let me briefly respond to some of your comments, Matt. And as an economist, I'm sure you also know you can't separate the economics from politics. And yes, Nord Stream 2 is under construction. Yes, Turk Stream is about to be completed, although it's still not clear by any stretch once it gets to the European border how it's going to go further than that. But in any event, I think the point is the one way that Nord Stream 2, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but it could be stopped by U.S. sanctions, even if it is completed. At one point I was talking to the companies who were saying, well, even if there's U.S. sanctions, Gazprom's still going to build it and complete it. And the response to them is, yeah, but then you won't be able to buy it. And they are very clear that if U.S. sanctions, or at least people I talk to, if U.S. sanctions do take place, that that they would have to pull out. So I just want, so it's fine to say. The point being, though, it's fine to say that it's built, and obviously that's a factor, but the politics and what's happened in the last week, all the issues that we've talked about, could still actually stop it, let's say, from implementation.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, question here.
State Department. We've talked a little bit about minimum transit through the GTS. I was wondering maybe if you can elaborate on that. I think you said a desirable volume would be around 60 BCM. And my question is, what kind of investment would the GTS need to maintain that volume over the medium to long term, for the GTS to be to remain a reliable piece of infrastructure?
Who wants to take that question?
Okay. Мінімальний обсяг.
The minimum option which Ukraine GTS would be profitable would be 60 billion of cubic meters annually. In this sense, I believe that Ukrainian gas transportation system will be preserved as a unique force, and they would secure the transit for the European companies. And this transit was going to be quite competitive to Sila. And I believe that it is important to understand that the lack of the absence of Ukrainian gas transportation system will create serious problems for Europeans. Yes, you calculate profitability, but you calculate only spends which goes only through the Baltic Sea, which means 7-10 billions of euro. But you do not calculate that in order to switch transport gas pipelines from Yamal, from Ukrainian direction to Baltics, Gazprom and Putin's team would have already spent $40 billion, and this money will never be regained. So do you think that Putin in Russia is going to make you a present? And if you think so, and if you think that he's based on the economic reasons, it is not a present from Putin. Maxim, please. I would like to add a couple of words regarding what my colleague said. First of all, for example, I would look at this issue from the technical point of view. If we have a technological task to unload the transport system, we can do it not only at expense of saving deviation of the transit of Russian obviation of Russian gas line. We also have potential which is worth already today to be used. For example, this is construction an Energo line with Poland, which would join the Norwegian line, which could use the gas which could have been delivered to the Swinoujstie terminal, and to use the activity, the so-called south-north line. So we could use the Swinoujstie line. We also have potential which could have been used by opening reverse via the gas station Tekova and Sakcheva, and to make a regime of behold with Romania. What does it mean? That Romania is to the natural gas which Romania can produce could be received by the Ukrainian system, and this way we could load the more gas to our pipelines, and the whole system would be balanced. And if we're talking about the gas station Sak in southern Ukraine, the so-called Balkan transportation corridor, with the building of the corridor from Anapa to Turkey, I, with my colleagues in Ukraine who work at Naftogaz, we have calculated the reverse format of the exploitation, where we could take gas from Turkey to the Ukrainian transportation system, which is also an option which should be considered. And one more thing, regarding interconnector Ukraine-Poland, in the situation for the beginning of this year, all the documentation was already presented, and the construction works should have been started. We're talking only about 100 of the pipeline to connect the systems and one gas piping station. Pumping station. Today, this project is only on paper. However, it should be implemented in the time of the exchange. And regarding the reverse deliveries from Romania, the volumes are much smaller. We're talking about making just a small connection, 7,000 kilometers.
Thank you. Ariel?
Спасибо.
Two comments. Number one, colleagues should not be too concerned about the expenses of the Russian Federation for two reasons. One, geopolitically, Russia is committed to starve Ukraine from revenue. Okay? Whatever it takes. Okay? When it comes to geopolitics, it's what in the 19th century was known as Primat der Außenpolitik, the primacy of foreign policy. If the strategic goal is to starve Ukraine from revenue, and I heard this as early as 2007 in Moscow, okay, then they'll do whatever it takes. That's the first. The second explanation is who earns from the construction of these pipelines that you worried about from Yamal or wherever it is. The Rottenbergs, the Timchenkos, the Transneft, etc. So we know who benefits from that. And these are billions of dollars. So it makes total economic sense for the Russians to build these new pipelines because billions of dollars fall off the cart into the correct pockets. So this is how it's going to be built. And the second issue is LNG. If Ukraine is serious about LNG, I spent a year in 2014 during the war trying to help Ukraine to build an LNG terminal in Odessa. Of course, during the war, and especially with the principals not being very keen to go to Mr. Poroshenko at the time to ask for high-level political support, they did not get high-level political support. If Turkey is really interested in improving the relationship with the United States, maybe this is a time, but this is a chance for the Trump administration to talk sense to Mr. Erdogan and say, Recep, this is a great opportunity for everybody. We will arrange, be it US gas, LNG, or Omani gas, Qatari gas, Algerian, Nigerian, Angolan, I don't care. Somebody, or eventually the Eastern Med, Egypt, Cyprus, and Israel, could supply. But this is a good thing for Turkish-American relations, to balance your very suspicious pro-Russian position, what with the buying of S-400s. Allow Ukraine to receive a steady supply of LNG through the Bosphorus, and your arguments that this violates some kind of your security concerns is not really true, because you're shipping SPG, or LPG rather, liquefied petroleum gas, which is even more flammable than LNG through the Bosphorus. And you're shipping ammonia. You're shipping all kinds of very dangerous cargo, so why don't you allow, under the proper security conditions, with the guards, and with the snipers, and with the accompanying boats, to float a tanker through the Bosphorus once a month will be enough for the Odessa or some other terminal in Ukraine. And we'll see what Erdogan says.
The problem, Ariel, is you're being rational.
That's my problem all my life.
Right.
I know.
And
Tell me about it.
The Turkish government has been so committed for so many years to not let LNG tankers go through the Bosporus that for them to reverse that, well, I mean, I've learned from a whole lot of things to never say never, but I think it would be very difficult.
We have one last question. I hope it's a good one. Here you go.
Thank you so much. Embassy of Ukraine. A few short comments and then question.
We need just a question. We have
yeah, because you know the government was mentioned, so I have to say a few words. I mean, on different scenarios of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I mean, what Ariel was talking in the beginning. Ukraine has an army right now, and the price for such an aggression would be huge for Russia. So I think we should also bear in mind. I mean, when we're discussing things like that, Ukraine will be able to defend itself, and the price will be huge for such a scenario. On the Nord Stream 2, what I would agree with Ambassador Morningstar, because nothing is over until it's over, and even when it's over, there are options again. So I mean, on that, I would be more cautious on the future of Nord Stream. On reforms, I think we should also bear in mind that next year Ukraine has presidential and parliamentary elections, and parliamentary elections are in October. So, I mean, the government and the parliament are in place till the end of the year. So there is no any problems for parliament and the cabinet to have new reforms. And reforms, they are demand-driven. So if there are demand for that reforms, and there is demand for these reforms from the private sector, it will be happening. And the question is, you know, when we're discussing the transit of gas through Ukraine, I mean, how can you trust Russia? What are the mechanism how you can trust Russia? Because when you look at the Azov Sea right now, the treaty is in place, but it's not enforceable.
Thank you so much. Does anyone want to take that? How can you trust Russia?
Very cautiously.
You have about 30 seconds.
It would be very difficult, and I understand the concern. Why would Gazprom or Russia ever keep its word? I go back to the point that some have made on Capitol Hill as a possibility that there be some kind of contingent sanctions legislation. In other words, there'd have to be safeguards because Ukraine couldn't abuse it, but that if in fact transit got below a certain point, then maybe there would be that sanctions could maybe go into effect. That would be one. That would be one way. It'd be better if the Europeans took that position. I'm not holding my breath on that one, but that would be one possible way of doing it.
Volodymyr, you have 30 seconds.
Those who can trust Russia, who love quick money, and hope that they're going to spend them quickly.
Thank you all very much. Can you please help me thank our panel and congratulate these two gentlemen on a fine report?